Someone who has a perception that the glass is always half empty will have a very different life experience to someone who believes it's always half full. Most people judge their happiness by their level of unhappiness, because the world that we live in and the way it's lived and all the stress and all the pressures of conforming, the pressures to pay the rent and all the rest of it. Most of the time when people feel less unhappy, they take that to be happiness. You can take a football example. You have two football teams playing. One is playing terribly and they're 2-0 down. They can't kick the ball in the right direction to save their lives. And then somehow, through apparently a lucky break, they score a goal. Against everything, all the run of play, they score a goal. What invariably happens then? The team that was shocking and losing 2-0 and was going nowhere suddenly starts to come into the game. They start to play better. They start to show confidence, more confidence in the game, and the game can transform. The skill of the team that was 2-0 down hasn't changed. They're no more skillful suddenly out of nowhere than they were before. No better footballers than they were a few minutes ago. What has changed is their perception. And what has changed that perception is just getting that lucky goal. It's changed their attitude and themselves. Hey, hold on a minute, we've got a chance here. And you see this in life all the time, where people's perceptions of self, their own sense of possibility, their own potential, is mirrored in the lives that they live. So the key is perceptions, because everything changes then. People say, why don't you have a bodyguard? Well, if I have a bodyguard, that is an external expression of my perception that something could happen to me. And once you allow that into your perceptual frequency band, you can manifest that. If you will not allow it in, it cannot manifest. It cannot. It's provable fact within mainstream science and even in quantum physics. The world that we are experiencing now, the world we call daily life, the physical world, only exists in the form that we think we're experiencing it and see it in a few centimeters at the back of the brain, which decodes visual reality. That's the only place it exists. This is being acknowledged more and more and more in mainstream science. This is where the world exists. And so, of course, if the world exists as we experience it in a few centimeters at the back of the brain, because that's what we decode from the equivalent of a Wi-Fi field into that holographic reality, which is what it is, not really physical, then we surely have control over what is manifested there and what we experience. Yes, it is. And if we start thinking and accepting that something can happen to us, we are opening that to manifestation. Doesn't mean it will, but it means you're opening up the possibility.
In terms of what we need to do, this is a process I've been through. I can only describe my experience. If you process everything through your head and your belly, the emotions, you will, first of all, be very prone to fear. And there's another point here of perceptual connection. There's a vortex here. They call it in the East a chakra, wheel of light, because actually on an energetic level, that's what it looks like. And this is the true heart. You know, the connection that people have between the heart and love, it doesn't come from the physical heart, although they do that. It comes from this. It's love. People think love is, oh, I love you, darling. You know, that's, one level of it. But love is beyond that. Love will always do what it knows to be right, irrespective, indeed it doesn't even consider consequences. Because to consider consequences would be to consider not doing what you know to be right. And love, the heart connection that takes you out of this five-sense reality, where you can access other levels of perception that gives you a much greater understanding of the reality that you are experiencing. When you operate only through the five senses, you are in this world and you are of this world. So when people go through this heart opening process, suddenly they look at the same world they were looking at before. It's not just, like I say, love in the sense of people perceive love, which has been totally discredited in that sense. You have to use unconditional love to get anywhere near it. Doing what you know to be right is not as difficult as you think it is. When I was a goalkeeper, professional footballer, the worst part for me was sitting in the dressing room waiting to go out, because going through your head were all the things that could go wrong. And then most weeks I'd go out and it would all be fine. And I found that Worrying about consequences is what imprisons us, enslaves us. When you open your heart, is you access not learned intelligence, you access innate intelligence, the intelligence of expanded consciousness. And expanded consciousness would look at this situation. I would just say this, try this for a month. Stop identifying with your labels and just self-identify with being a point of attention within an infinite state of consciousness. And because you're a point of attention within an infinite state of consciousness, you can have a state of consciousness that big, or you can have a state of consciousness potentially infinite. And the only difference between that is perception. And more than that, it's self-identity. I am always says, I am limited. There are limits to me. I am label. That says, I am infinite. I can access consciousness ultimately, infinitely. I'm not my name. I'm not my job. These are experiences. I am all that is, has been, and ever can be. Just for a month, go around from the perspective, the self-identity. I'm a point of attention within an infinite state of consciousness, having an experience called my name and my job, my labels. I am not the labels, they're my experiences. I am the consciousness having the experience. Try that for a month. In a month, at the end of a month, probably before, you won't know yourself. You'll be a different person because your point of attention will have expanded and shifted and the world won't look the same anymore. We are love, that's what we are. Everything else is what we are programmed to perceive that we are.
This energy that we're generating that can now be photographed and can certainly be felt when you meet someone and you say, oh, I've got bad vibes from them, or I've got good vibes from them, depending on their own state of being. This energy is the energy that creates our reality, because it attracts to us a reflection of itself, and what that energy reflects is our inner self, our emotional, spiritual, and mental state. When we feel fear, we attract to us fear. We attract to us what we most fear. And this is the ultimate evolutionary genius. It's what I call designer evolution. Because of this system of what we put out is what we get back, we constantly see a reflection of our inner self in our everyday life. Therefore, we can see our inner self in a physical way and learn from the experience and move on. Also, fear is the greatest block on evolution. Whatever area that we fear, that our fear relates to, is a no-go area for our evolution. Because people don't normally say, well, I fear that, I'm going to face it. So this process of drawing to us what we put out means that we have to face what we're putting out. There was a lovely song that I came across by an American group which said, if you hold anger, guess what comes to you? A lot of very angry people do. And some people find it very difficult to take this on because it's much easier in their own mind to blame someone for what happens in our lives. Much more of a challenge to say, hey, I've created this, I'm responsible for it. But when you do, you stop creating what you don't like and you start creating what you do.
Because as you change, your world will change. As your perceptions change, particularly perceptions of self change, your world will change. But if you look at what we call the world, it is the collective perceptions of humanity. That's all it is. It's the collective perceptions of humanity, the individual and collective perceptions. Therefore, when people look at the world and they say, it's just too much, it's just too big, the problems are just too massive, what can we do? Well, if the way to change it was via, quote, physical means, I would say to you, you're right. We ain't going to change it. We've got no chance. Because physical changes as we perceive physicality doesn't really exist. Everything is slow and laborious, and you need committees and someone to take the minutes. But hold on a minute. That is just the projection of human consciousness. You don't have to change that. You change consciousness, and that must change because that is an expression of consciousness which created it. Perceptions that created it. Change perceptions, change the world, because the world is the sum total of our perceptions.